You're a translator at Netflix. You've got 1 centimetre at the bottom of this screen to translate the phrase for every single country and culture to understand. What's the time, Mr. Wolf? How do you do it? Well, many might say 1, 2, 3, turn. Because of the way the game is played, you'd have to keep running so the other player can't see you until they turn around, and then you stop. Well, this is exactly the problem that the Netflix translators would have faced when translating the Squid Game. Now, they could have done exactly that, the 1, 2, 3 turn system. However, they opted for red light, green light. Red light, green light is not exactly what they're saying in the Squid Game either. The game that is played in Korea is actually called 무궁화 꽃이 피었습니다. As we know it, 무궁화 꽃이 피었습니다. So you may have heard that one, and it actually means the hibiscus flower has bloomed. The hibiscus flower being the national flower of South Korea. That's a game commonly played by children, but how on earth do you really get that message across with 1 centimetre at the bottom of the screen? We're going to be talking about a few of the problems that translators face and why the Squid Game has really taken this to the forefront of the world. The very first thing that jumped out to me are simple words like oppa. Now, you may have heard of the word oppa from Oppan Gangnam Style. Aha! Yes, you have heard of it before. You do know a bit of Korean. And it means older brother, older man as well. So please stay with me here. It's not only older brother, it's an older relationship. It's a relationship to an older man that you have, but you have to be a female to do this, okay? So it has to be a younger woman with an older man. Please stay with me because this is important. So it's also a little bit sexualized there as well. That's why you hear oppa so much in K-pop songs. And yes, it drives some people damn crazy. But let's take it back to Squid Game and see how some of the characters are using oppa. So we have Minya. Minya is actually trying to get on Toksu's good side. Now, he is seen as the toughest guy in the competition. To me, he's a bit of a bully, but okay. So the way Minya is actually trying to get on Toksu's good side is that she's actually using this term. She's using oppa again and again to be able to get onto his close side. Now, this is actually translated as baby, and I think that this is where a lot of people have been a bit disgruntled with some of the translational issues because they feel that it could have been done in different ways. Now, again, I do believe this is just interpretation, but if I were to be translating the Squid Game, I would have actually said just the word oppa. I would have put O-P-P-A. And I think this would have forced the viewer to look up the word oppa and actually seen where it comes from and how its usage is. And in the past, this has actually been done in every single other Korean drama that I've watched and every single film that I've watched. Whenever it's translated into English, they use that spelling in the English romanized letters. So it's incredibly strange that this is such an international piece of work. And for the first time in my life, I've actually seen oppa not being just being translated. That's really odd that it's being translated to baby. On the flip side, we have other names being called. So Minya is actually called grandma quite a lot. Now, this actually comes across to the Western viewer as really condescending and really mean. Like, why would you call somebody grandma? That sounds like a very mean thing to say. However, in South Korea, you have all these names to show respect. You call someone grandmother if they look like they could be your grandmother, and it's meant to be a polite thing. However, it's nice to see that there's this characterization within Minya. She doesn't want to be labeled as this older woman. She doesn't want to be an older woman. She specifically hides her age throughout the series, and it only builds on characterization when she gets annoyed at people calling her grandmother, and she also labels herself as a younger woman by calling Toksu oppa. It kind of makes sense to her character. Another thing that leapt out to me when watching this was Ali, the beloved character Ali, calling other people sir in the subtitles. So he's calling people sir throughout the series to be respectful, to be polite. But actually, if we look at the direct translation of what he's calling people, it's the term CEO, head of company. And because he's doing that, it actually says a lot more about his character than it comes off in the first place if we were to just look at the translation. This is because it's very clear that Ali is being exploited, sadly. And you can see that he's an immigrant that has moved into South Korea, and we know he's not being paid at all, and we know he's being exploited. So he's been working in an environment and perhaps even learning Korean in an environment where he's forced to say CEO to anyone who seems higher above him on the chain, which actually it's a really sad part of his language that he's put in there. Again, it's these very small nuances that we miss in the translation because, again, if I were interpreting it or translating it, I would go for it and call him CEO. I wouldn't say that Ali was saying sir, especially when he was talking to Sang-woo. Speaking of which, this actually heightens the portrayal that we get from Sang-woo with Ali, because Ali is calling this man CEO of a company. He's giving him so much respect. And so when Sang-woo says, you don't have to call me that, you can lower your language, you can step down your language a little bit, you can call me just by my name or anything else than CEO. So we have that kind of bonding. That's a really important step in South Korean language. Excuse me. That's a really important step in the South Korean language when somebody tells you you can lower your language down a little bit. You don't have to use the top of the politeness system when using your language. So when Sang-woo says you don't have to do that, it's almost like there's been a bond created. So when, spoilers, sorry, when Sang-woo then portrays him, it's a really big deal. Before we move on, I just want to say that my opinion is not the be-all and end-all. If you have a different opinion, I'd love to hear it. Put it down in the comment section below, and I do actually regularly check the comments, which I definitely should not do as a creator. Just before we move on, I really do want to highlight one thing that the translators did, and that is to keep the word ganbu. And I'm sure that many people have looked up the phrase already just from watching the series out of curiosity. And I find it incredibly interesting that they did not do that with oppa. They left oppa to it. They said, no, it's baby now. And ganbu was kept the same. And I've never, ever seen that in all 13 years of studying Korean, ever. Okay, let's move on to the hardest problem any translator will ever have when translating a Korean language-based piece of media, and that is the hierarchical language system. South Korea is a Confucius society, and that means that the elders are highly respected in terms of younger people, and the language matches up with that as well. Now, I know that a lot of the people seeing this won't be able to speak or read or understand Korean at all, and I get that, but hear me out. I've got one phrase. I'm going to say it in a couple of different ways, and you should be able to hear the difference. I'm just going to say, have you eaten? 먹었어? 먹었어요? 먹습니까? 드셨어요? Wow, 4 different words technically, the same verb but different endings, and each ending indicates who you're talking to, how in what relation they are as a relationship to you. And oh my goodness, how do you even begin to transcribe that? Well, the answer is you don't. You don't even bother, because it would be way too much to explain on the screen. Imagine putting at the bottom, oh, by the way, this sentence ending means that you're talking to somebody who is older than you and has this status in comparison to you. You wouldn't do that. So translators genuinely don't, but it's a nuance that is often lost within interpretation. So I'm actually making this video today because I simply love the way the Squid Game has actually unleashed this problem to the worldwide screen. It's something that translators have often talked about, but nobody's really understood the nuances up until this point, I feel. Finally, South Korean movies and cinema and works from all over the world are becoming more accessible with things like Netflix, and we need more translators out there. And with that, we actually get to experience more refined problems that translators have. But this is not the first time or the last time this will ever happen. I want to take the example of the Odyssey, one of my favourite Greek classical books out there. Originally not a book, it was actually only told. So it was an oral tradition in the ancient Greek times to tell this story of Odysseus. At one point, however, it had to be written down, and it was written down in a lot of languages, including English. One of the most used translations, in fact, one that I studied when I was but a teen, was the translation by Fagles. Emily Wilson, the professor of classical studies at the University of Pennsylvania, has actually translated this book also, but done it in a very specific way. She's actually gone and looked at some of the language that was originally translated from ancient Greek and found that the word girls, simply girls, was translated into the term sluts or whores by Fagles. Now, I don't know about you, but just because they are a female does not make them a slut. Thank you very much. But it was the context that he gathered this from. So these females, they were also slaves, okay? So that's probably where he got that slut thing from, because they were being used for sex, but that does not make them, sorry, that doesn't make you I can't talk about this. I just feel like the word slut should not exist. So quick shout out to the classical professor of classical studies at the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you very much for clearing that one up. But what you've also done is opened up the hatch along with Squid Game to open up this problem, to actually be able to discuss it with the world. There are translation issues that haven't actually been looked at yet. But what can we do about this? What can the viewer do about this problem? There isn't much we can actually do about this as a viewer, but what we can do is stay curious. We can stay curious and open-minded about the translations that we see. We can take in the fact that translations can sometimes not be as direct. They might be more interpretations. That doesn't mean the translator isn't doing their job well. It doesn't mean that it's a bad translation. It actually just means it's an interpretation that somebody has given to a bit of speech that a character has said. And perhaps we should, if there's a word that we don't know, stick our finger out, Google it, find out what it is, such as the word ganbu from the Squid Game, and see what it's all about. That's actually all I can give for today, but I am very looking forward to seeing your comments. And as always, stay safe. See you next time.